Hey, Simplifiers. Today I have an interview with Tory Reiss in New York City about leadership, integrity, and values in real estate. His mission is to live in awe of our potential. Currently, he's helping discerning investors build superior, diverse portfolios with alternative investments as the CEO and co founder of Equi. So, you're going to love this conversation about building values driven team culture that attracts like-minded employees and clients, plus how to navigate the genuine urgency with high-quality work. Let's dive in. Well, Tory, thank you so much for joining me on here.
Yeah, happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
Probably the last couple of years, been seeing each other's work, and a couple of things that I noticed right away was like, man, this guy cares about making change in the world. He cares about values, and like, we got to talk about it.
It's really important. And if I learned anything from like the past few companies I've been a part of, like, I think it's important to be clear about what your values are and aren't. And so it's definitely been a learning process, but I think it's an important part of the journey.
What are your thoughts just about as you're approaching, like you said, company to company, but yet you're the common denominator. You've got your own personal values that you bring in and it affects your business. What's that kind of journey been like for you?
I mean, entrepreneurship is a very personal journey. I think, every founder is going through a process of trying to, figure out who they are while simultaneously trying to define the culture of the business that they're a part of, while trying to relate to all the people that they bring on board. And there's a constant tension everywhere that I've been. uh, you know, I've I've been pretty outspoken about the values of that organization, whether it was a company I founded or not. And sometimes that's appreciated, sometimes it isn't. I think having the space to debate is in and of itself a really important attribute. So having the space to like discuss and go back and forth on various values that you think either are or are not aligned. A lot of value can actually be in the debate itself.
That is so true. And, I'm noticing just from a marketing stance, you know, investors and partners are like, okay, yeah, you've got the great product, but like, what are the things that you care about? What are the things that you value? And it makes such a difference when you're aligned. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. I think a lot of people notice. I can tell you, even just at Equi, we've always published our values, or not always, but the last few iterations of our website, we've made sure to include our values. I can't remember if the very first version did or didn't, but I know the past few iterations of our website has. And I think part of why that's important is you want to actually actively repel the people who might not align with your values and attract the people who do. And so I think being a bit more outspoken, you really only have, something to gain from it. And I've had a lot of people comment during interviews, job interviews where they say, oh, this value caught my attention. And I've always appreciated when people take the time to, read about that and determine if it does or doesn't align with their personal values, or if it's something that they want to, that is important to them and that they want to double down on or not. So an exercise we do every single year is we revisit our values and we actually see, are we living up to them? Do we need to change them? And we actually try and map all the examples of like the good and the bad behaviors back to our existing values. And if you think about it, it's like a value is only so good as if it's like an expressed and lived value. Otherwise, it's an aspirational value. And so if we can't map back certain behaviors, good or bad, to either representing or violating a value, then it isn't really an expressed value. And so we'll notice, oh, we need something that actually recognizes, because we're all pointing at the same thing, but we don't have a named value that maps to it. And so we sometimes will modify a value, add a value, or remove a value. Now, consistently, there's one value that's identified as an aspirational value, mean like it's sometimes harder to pinpoint how it's expressed. And that's one here around repair the world, or this concept of like needing to have some sort of higher motivation beyond just business success. But we've agreed that that's actually important enough and something that matters to us all as individuals and to our long-term, collective goals here, that we want to include it. Now, we do small things along the way, like, we volunteered at soup kitchens, we've made donations. Even though we're not yet quite profitable, we still think we can give with our time, even if we can't give as meaningfully with money just yet. And so in those small ways, I think it's important. It also attracts a certain type of person. So, yeah, I would say that's my hot take on values. I don't think it's that controversial or anything, but I think making them a center point of the organization is really important.
So, how did you come up with the other five? I mean, lift each other up, be a fiduciary, candor as kindness, demand excellence, execute with urgency. Like, were those things that you were like, oh, let me just kind of pull from my background? Or was that like, another leader that, a board member that's like, we need to like, how did you kind of get to that, first iteration of that?
Yeah. Well, the very first iteration came initially just from the co-founders. And we did an exercise where we tried to imagine, basically from our own lived experience, who are the people who we think of as like the most excellent operators and founders that we've ever worked with personally. So we had to like know them personally. And then we, based on that, wrote out all the traits that we felt defined those people, where, our thinking is like, if you had an army of these people, you would be unstoppable. And, and you're like, they're just that amazing individuals. And, I thought of a handful of friends who are either founders or some of them just great operators, great people. And if you distill those people back into like the attributes, then we group the attributes. There's lots of overlap between all of our various examples. And we kind of mapped them into roughly, 5 buckets or so. And then we named the value. And so that was actually the first exercise. And really in the beginning, the values are just the founder's values. But then as you hire and operate as a business, then it's time to do the exercise that I was talking about, where you reflect on now the collective values that are both expressed or aspirational. And then that allows everyone to be part of co-constructing the values. What's interesting is that I think it has changed, maybe 20, 30%, but it hasn't been wholesale. It's not like an 80% change. And, every year I see evolutions in how we approach the values and things that are missing, and, slight additions to the definitions. And we use that exercise to see if we're still, staying true to the values that we all say that we aspire to and agree to prescribe to.
Right. It's a lot more than lip service. It's connecting it to actions. It's how in your culture, you celebrate different things and you kind of point back to, this is why we're connected, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are ways that you, just as a leader, you celebrate those values as you see them in employees?
Yeah. So I think this is definitely an area we can do a better job of. We have a lot of ideas that we've floated. What we've done a couple times is we had the whole leadership team collectively, we went value by value and then listed out, every single person had to list like 2 or 3 examples of what they thought was like the most exemplified that value from the past like 6 or 12 months. And then once we had everybody's 3 examples, we looked across, now we had something like 20 plus examples. We then voted anonymously. You had like 2 votes each. So we could essentially stack rank what most exemplified that given value. And then that gave us kind of like a top three, but it gave us like a value champion. And we recognized those people in front of the whole company, and they got, we give little prizes that kind of align with the value. Now, I think it's a really great practice. I think we need to do it more frequently for that to be effective. Doing it once a year is only so effective. In a perfect world, I could see it actually being something we do, one value a month, for example. Or I think that's my aspiration, is to get us to that point where, you can clearly have like a leaderboard, and it's like, these are the people who are most crushing it and exemplify this value. Because they end up, I think, teaching and training other people. And something that's great is like when I have, exit interviews, as those are bittersweet, but oftentimes, I hear great feedback. Like I had one recently, and, she was able to give really excellent feedback. And something that stood out is she was like, I honestly like have loved the people I've worked with. I've really enjoyed it. Like I've had a great time. The culture is great. That she had both the good and the bad. And I think that's another mechanism, is like when people are on their way out, make sure that you take the time to get an exit interview and be like, what values do you think are being exemplified or not? Because that's when you're going to get your most honest feedback. Rewarding it is one thing, but also like making sure you're triangulating, from people who are on their way in or on their way out, I think is also really important.
That's huge. When we're seeing what we want the harvest to be, we have to go back to, well, what are the seeds that we're planting? What are the habits that we're consistently doing? What are the disciplines? It's almost like these values that you don't just want to put on a wall, but you want to put in your heart. You want it to happen, is because they're the habits, they're the disciplines that you set. And so just making those very tangible for your team is just so important. And they can be able to directly connect, okay, when I do this habit, whether that's reporting, whether that's, for being a fiduciary, and doing due diligence, like talk about what are some of those good seeds that you want to be able to, invest into habits, into disciplines that then produce that kind of values harvest.
There's this plugin for Slack called Hey Taco, and you can tag people and give them a taco, and it's kind of back of like kudos, that you share around the company. It's a seed to plant where you just introduce a small kind of silly tool like that. But then people actually start competing around like, who's actually collecting like the most tacos and who's like the taco champion. And then we started doing, taco Tuesdays around it and things like that.
Yep.
So I think a lot of times it just takes like being willing to experiment and try small ideas and see if they take on a life of their own and grow into something more than that. And if people like something or have their own ideas, they'll contribute in their own way. So I think just being receptive to experiments that people want to run, because, that was not my idea. But it was someone who was new to the team, and they're like, I loved this at my last company. We're like, yeah, let's try it out. And I think allowing room for that type of experimentation allows you to see, and making it clear to everybody, like, hey, these are collective values. So we want to see how everyone thinks about approaching them. I think that's a great way to get great outcomes. I think it is surprising that sometimes the smallest acts have the largest impact. Something that I started doing really early on was having soup sent to employees when they're out sick. So we have a Slack channel where people, share, hey, if you're going to miss time or you're out sick, like drop in a channel, hey, I've got COVID. Hey, I've got pneumonia. Hey, I've got this. And when we would see that, in the beginning, I would be the one to like go to DoorDash and like send them a soup and say, hey, get better. Then, I asked my EA to start helping with that. And it just kind of, what I've heard is, I think for a lot of people, it was very unexpected and personal. And it's small acts like that I think people really remember. Getting a bowl of soup when you're sick, And so I don't think it has to be huge grand gestures or big initiatives, because like we don't have the capacity right now for like huge value initiatives. Like we're so focused on execution as a startup and surviving and getting to profitability and growing. And, that's really important. And we all win if we accomplish that. But along the way, I think there are very small things you can do and encourage other people to do, that express the values that matter to your organization. So, um, I think that's a good example, and like, what did that cost us over the grand arc of history? Under $1,000 probably in the whole history of the company has been spent on soup. I don't actually know what our soup budget is, but I think it's a small thing that I know makes a huge difference to me. When someone thinks of me and sends me chicken soup when I'm sick, I really appreciate that, because there's a level of thoughtfulness and care for like my personal well-being that I think isn't always there. So I think there's small ways like that, and then there are more major, you know, things you can do. But I think what's most important is just starting, doing what's the smallest first step.
I love that example. That's so good. And you mentioned we've got to execute, and you have execute with urgency. And so, like, how do you, you know, in your own words, balance the equilibrium of like, all right, we've got to go, but also we need to have that, excellence. And so, I mean, how do you lead that? How do you model that for your team?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is that the best people I've ever worked with do excellent work, but they do it with velocity. It's really that simple. I think slow startups die, um, and you have to move quickly if you want to survive. There's like a very practical aspect of like runway, but then there's also a sense of urgency that is working against most large organizations because it's lacking. And I think benefits startups that can move much faster. And so if you don't have that sense of urgency, um, you're no better than, a big company, except for you don't have any of the profitability or resources that they have. So it's unlikely you're going to survive. And your competition are other startups who, if they have urgency, are going to beat you. So I do think that like that aspect of velocity is really critical. Now, what I've had to balance that with, because we are a financial services organization and a technology company, we can't rush things. You don't want low quality. You have to balance high quality with urgency and velocity. And it's not like move fast and break things like Facebook, because if you
I was
break
about
a
to
web
say.
app, if you break a web app, it's no big deal. If you lose someone's money, that's a huge deal. So I think we have to inherently have slightly different values. Like, that's why we balance the like urgency or velocity aspect with quality. And like, if you need to take a little bit of extra time to make sure that it's done well, then do it. But you need in the back of the mind to still have that sense of urgency. I think that's still really critical.
Was there like a mentor or like a book that was on your shelf that got you to get that? Like, was that like a great piece of leadership advice that changed, or was that just something that you were just, in the course of the last three companies, just kind of catching up to, or what was that process like for you?
I've definitely just experienced it firsthand, and that's been through observation. But also, I think a lot of knowledge in Silicon Valley is not just passed through books, it's passed through close networks of friends and mentors and blog posts and podcasts. And like,
Yep.
I've been a big consumer of, startup culture, for the better part of 15 years. Generally, I look at it as like you can acquire certain theoretical knowledge, and then you measure that against your kind of empirical lived experience. And the feedback that sticks is the stuff that you've both read about and experienced and seen evidence to support it. And so that's definitely falls in that category. Is like, you hear a lot about that and then you live it and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's so true.
Exactly. What would you say is like recently the best piece of leadership advice that you'd like to share?
One of the better things that I've been told in the past year was a reminder from my coach. He likes to ask, like, is it more important to you to be liked or respected? And that, unfortunately, as a leader of an organization, you have to make that choice. It will be virtually impossible for you to be both liked and respected all the time,
Yeah.
if ever. Therefore, it was a clear choice to me. It's like I'd much rather be respected than liked. And so sometimes you have to do a lot of unpopular things. It could range from a pivot to a layoff to, giving direct feedback to somebody who, isn't going to like hearing it. And so I think that that's really important advice to remember, and to not let it get to you, because I think it's very much human nature to want to be liked, unless, there are certain people who just aren't born that way, like Elon Musk. Does not care if people are not like, I think he actually enjoys people
I
hating him.
know.
So that's an advantage for him in many ways, because I would argue that a lot of people respect him. Definitely people who work at his companies tend to respect him quite a great deal, but many of them hate him. So I wish that wasn't the case. I wish there was a way that you could both be like loved and respected. And I think like there are some people that pull that off. But if you ever come to the fork in the road where you have to decide, which I think inevitably happens, you just have to remember that piece of advice.
That's so true. Would you tell yourself that, as you were a budding startup, 10, 15 years ago, like how would that have changed, different examples in your early career?
The failure of my first company can be traced back to, wanting to be perceived as kind of like fair with my co-founder, and, wanting to be liked, and, being okay with going 50-50 instead of like even just 51-49 on like equity as an
Right.
example. I think that was a really bad decision in hindsight, because there came a time when we needed to make some really hard decisions, and he and I were at a stalemate, and we had no way to effectively break the tie. And I think it played a large part in why we ended up having to wind that company. And it was a really, really hard thing to go through, but an important lesson for me to learn. And, I have no regrets, because I learned some very important and very hard lessons.
This has been, so rich. I hope other people want to connect with you. What would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or they can reach out. It's just Tory at Equi. Pretty straightforward. Always happy to pay it forward. Might not always have time for a full-on call, but generally do my best to respond to email, even if it slows down during the crazy times. So yeah, happy to help if there's any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tory.
No problem. Appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode with Tory. I just wanted to note just a couple of things. Number one, remember the power of taking proactive action. Whether it's in your personal life or business ventures, of course, waiting for the perfect moment can often lead to missed opportunities. Instead, take those calculated, confident steps forward that can propel you towards your goals. Number two, we talked about the value of continuous learning. And as we navigate through our ever-changing world, staying open to new ideas, constantly seeking out those learning opportunities gives us not just a competitive edge, but helps us lead in our personal and professional growth. We need to emphasize the importance of resilience. Challenges are inevitable, but our ability to bounce back and adapt is what sets us apart. Embrace those setbacks as learning opportunities and just experiences to help build your resilience muscles. Please remember to subscribe, share with a friend, leave a review. I'd love to be able to hear from you. Come back next week for more insights to help you grow your business. Until then, keep it simple, Saints.